Hello, and welcome to the Voices of Bellevue School District podcast, where we amplify the voices of students, staff, and families, sharing their unique lived experiences to strengthen our Bellevue community. In each episode, we'll explore We Belong, significant cultural traditions, customs, and lived experiences of our beloved Bellevue community. We learn academic programs and innovative initiatives, along with the staff and students behind them. We lead discussions with leaders in our community on topics that drive innovation in education. In this Building a Beloved Community podcast episode, we honor Ms. Stone, a kindergarten teacher whose quiet strength and steady presence helped shape the Bellevue and Clyde Hill school communities in the late 1950s. Through a conversation with former student Don Chapman, listeners will hear how her kindness, patience, and belief in every child created a foundation of belonging that still guides our district today. Don's reflections reveal how a single teacher's influence can ripple across a lifetime, shaping values of inclusion and humanity. This episode connects Mrs. Stone's legacy to the Bellevue School District's ongoing commitment to building a beloved community, where every student is seen, supported, and inspired to thrive. Welcome, everyone. My name is Janine Thorne. I'm the Chief of Communication for the Bellevue School District, and I am joined today by Donovan Martin and Don Chapman, who brought forth a wonderful, wonderful story that is co-signed by our strategic plan and our initiative around building a beloved community. I spoke with Donovan, who shared some of Don's story and is the impetus for this podcast and for us talking about Mrs. Stone and Clyde Hill Elementary in 1959. So with no further ado, we'll jump right into the first question. So Don, tell me a little bit about why Miss Stone, why her story was so important to Bellevue and to the Clyde Hill school community.
Well, to begin with, she was my kindergarten teacher, and I can look at it through two lenses today. The lens of a 5-year-old, and again, she was my teacher. I liked her. There wasn't much else to report. That is, unless I look at the situation as an adult, then it becomes clear that she must have been one extraordinary individual. I mean, how did she get there? What was her background in education? Where did she grow up? Where did she go to university? Who were her parents? So I see her completely differently as an adult, more of a trailblazer, as someone who took Dr. King's torch and carried it into the next generation. And I look at her as being somebody who took that trailblazing that we now all stand on her shoulders. And I think she was quite a trailblazer to Bellevue, to Clyde Hill, to not just the school district, but probably everybody that she touched.
Donovan, can you tell us why Miss Stone, why the story, and why now?
The story resonated because, every year we do a feature for 30 days or longer on Black History Month. And we try to bring the stories that are not heard of. The majority of the community knows the Martin Luther Kings, the Harriet Tubmans, which are all very important stories. But a lot of the times we don't get to hear about the educators or the custodians or the police officers who still play an intricate role in shaping history. And, I had the great pleasure of meeting Don as we were working on what's called the Lost Canadians, which is a fascinating story. And I was talking to him about Black History Month, and he said, I have a teacher who's my elementary teacher, and she just happened to be a remarkable Black woman. And I had to stop and think for a second. I was like, wow, this is from 1959, and she was a teacher. So the wheels started turning and saying, it must have been, again, just to echo what Don said, a remarkable individual to be in that position in those times. But then it also brought to my attention that, the situation, there had to be great people around her and a very progressive community to say, well, here is this young Black lady, and we're going to allow her to teach based on education and not race. So, which is important because that's a part usually that gets forgotten in the whole context of race. There had to be somebody who was clearly not a Black person in that position to say, we believe in what you're doing. We believe in your role as on merit. So I think that's important that we cannot forget that part of the story. But it was just an amazing story, and I'm glad it led us to you because now we get to have your voice and echo it, and hopefully we get to reach out, or somebody sees this story and relate it to her and just reaches back.
Can I expound on that just for a second?
Yes.
I am in total agreement with you. Somebody had to hire her. Somebody had to have the vision. And I one time went through the Holocaust Museum, and there in the museum was a wall of people who had saved Jews, who had the vision. And in a way, I look at the administrators of Bellevue the same way. Whoever was in charge, whoever said, yes, this is the woman I want. And they must have done a great job of preparing or whatever, because as a student, there was absolutely no form of protest or problems, or at least through the lens of me as a youngster. She was just my teacher. Nobody made a big deal about it. And I quite liked her. And maybe that another area that we don't think about is young minds and impressions, that she left the impression. As my mother said one time, I don't remember saying this, but my mother one time told me that I came home and said, well, I like brown people. Isn't that a wonderful thing to then carry through for the rest of my life?
That's one of the things that in this strategic plan that's centered around building human-centered systems and building a beloved community, that was happening back in 1959 in that classroom with Miss Stone and you, Don, and your classmates. So then let me ask you this question. What is the one memory that captures the kind of teacher she was and the impact she had on you?
I mean, this isn't in a classroom as much. This was an outing that we took as a kindergarten class. We took the train from King Street Station to Everett and back. And she was the one watching over us, keeping us safe. Little kids, that's very important. And I remember that long tunnel just to the north side of King Street Station. It was quite an outing that day. And I remember that she was the one who made it happen. And that I looked at her. I mean, again, she was the one watching over us, our caretaker, if you will. And for some reason, I remember the warmth, the caring.
That's awesome. To circle back to just the idea of, allyship and people who had to work with her and have confidence in her to be your teacher. Ms. Stone taught during a time when Black educators often faced those quiet barriers. What does her presence in the classroom represent in a broader history of our community, or in the community at Clyde Hill at that time? What does her presence mean to you?
Again, you have to remember, I have two lenses. I have the lens of a 5-year-old, but I look back, and in time, I ended up being a member of the Tuskegee Airmen, the Black pilots of World War II. I mean, I've been a member of that for 20 or 25 years. My mother was a member, my daughter, my wife, we all joined. Could that have been an influence from Miss Stone? And then my wife and I sponsored the Tuskegee Airmen to go north into Vancouver to meet the Chinese World War II veterans. how did I get this? I mean, obviously, my parents were very inclusive. That cannot be stressed enough. But also, experience in life, being around Miss Stone, uh, seeing that, witnessing it, living it, obviously put huge memories into me. And I'm a better person for it. In some ways, I look back and I go, what lesson could we take from it? And sometimes I think if only all kindergartners could have an educator, a teacher that didn't exactly look like them or didn't come exactly from their background, how much better would we be?
Absolutely. And so we're talking about her example of how she connected us together on values that we're uplifting today, the sense of belonging and learning and leading. Donovan, can you talk a little bit about the importance of just being connecting and connecting across different social, ethnic, cultural identities to create a belonging for people?
It's important. When I look at my upbringing here in Winnipeg, we've been fortunate where we are probably literally the melting pot of Canada. So growing up with all ethnicities and race, it was just standard everyday practice. Now, if we juxtapose that to Ms. Stone, it's important because first of all, it shows that everybody, we're all on the same equal playing field. We see everybody as who they are, and just it's a matter of just how do we be inclusive? How do we take the lessons that we're being taught and apply that to everyday life? And clearly, those lessons resonated with Don, and when you see the work he's done, and it shows, right? And this was one of those stories for me and for our organizations that we just really had to jump on, because again, we have to look at the time. If this was a story, let's say, presented maybe about a teacher 3 years ago, it may not be a story we would necessarily say we need to jump on. It would be equally as important, but because of the time, the time in history. So when you get moments like those to tell stories that may have never been told, you really have to, move forward and do what you can to get that message out. Mind you, the situation in Bellevue and Clyde Hill was for sure a lot different from, let's say, something in Georgia or Mississippi. But at the end of the day, it was still that time era, and a lot was going on, which still made it a significant story we needed to tell.
Don, you spoke about Miss Stone, and you alluded to her, her representation and how that formed the way you went out in the world and raised your family and gave back to different communities. Did you want to say a little bit more about that?
Well, I've been involved in citizenship issues in Canada, and I've been the force behind 12 parliamentary bills. The latest one just passed recently. And every Canadian on the planet, 40 million people, are affected by this. And when you deal with 40 million people in a country, an entire country, you have ethnicities and backgrounds of every conceivable type of person. And the one factor that we all have in common is our Canadian citizenship. And I think Donovan hit on something. He said in Winnipeg, where it's so diverse, and I'm from Vancouver, where it is diverse, but it is not as diverse as Winnipeg, and never, I don't think, has been as diverse as Winnipeg. It becomes a celebration in a community, a source of pride that we're all from Winnipeg, we're all from Canada, or we share this bond. And I just think that Miss Stone And I have to say this, and my parents, many times over, instilled that upon me. My mother happened to be the YWCA teacher for what was called back then in the late 30s, early 40s, the colored women or colored girls in Montreal. And my mother wasn't just, she taught them during the day and left for the night. She lived with them. She lived in the same quarters as they did. So if they could not walk through, let's say, the lobby of the Windsor Hotel, my mother couldn't do it. And so again, we all learn, and my mother was, and my father were great teachers and encouraged that. And then today, my grandchildren are mixed race. They're half Filipino. And I I think I really loved my grandson's comment when he was 4. We walked in, or I walked into the kitchen, he's sitting up on the counter, and he says, "Grandpa, I have something important to tell you." And I look at him, I go, "Okay, what is it?" He says, "I'm Filipino." Like I had never noticed this before. And I just looked at him and it came out of my mouth. I said, "Yes, and you're half white too. And I want you to be proud of both sides of who we are, or who you are, because I'm proud of both sides of who you are." And I'm very lucky that you can judge people by their character and not their color.
Wow. And that's a ripple effect from Miss Stone in 1959. Look at how that just reverberates in the work that you do and are doing in Canada. I mean, in another country away from the United States, and in Seattle specifically, that seed that she planted just by example. The second part I want to say is the allyship we were talking about allyship with the administration and Ms. Stone and how they had to hire her. But what about the allyship between your parents and Ms. Stone to entrust your education to her as your teacher?
It was never in question. Even later, when I was writing my book, I went to my mother and I asked questions like, "Tell me about Miss Stone." I actually tried to find her. I was never able to do it. And it was Miss Stone, because at the time, married women weren't as easy that they could be a teacher. And my mother told me, she just said, "Well, she's your teacher." I looked at it at the time and go for it. It never became a question. I don't remember any problems with any other parents or anything else. So it's not just my parents. You have to look at that and say, good on everybody for allowing that, because we are in Bellevue where we are because of people like that. And now to the next little ripple, if you will. A year later, another Black educator was hired in the Bellevue School District. And in time, he became the principal, I believe, of the junior high school. And a friend of mine who went to high school with me, she was a student there on the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And she says the principal, the Black principal, called an assembly with all the students and came out and talked about it. And she said that was so meaningful to her. And I mean, she and I talked about this just last week, and look at the impression that made on her.
Wow.
And yeah, and was Miss Stone responsible for that other teacher a year later being hired? Well, I can tell you this, every eye was on Miss Stone to see if she made a mistake. And if she did, they would have said, "Okay, we can't go to the next person." So just in the fact that somebody else was hired means that she had to be exemplary, just a phenomenal person outside of not just being a teacher, that she had done a marvelous job. And I'm so lucky to have been her student.
Yeah. And that kind of 360s back to the very first question, which, the second question, which talks about some of those silent barriers that she may have faced, which we, could only speculate. As we close out, today is an important day for another reason. We lost a international icon, humanitarian, Reverend Jesse L. Jackson. He was in many ways a part of the beloved community because he worked directly with Dr. Martin Luther King. And so in that whole spirit, in this whole spirit of the beloved community, if you either Donovan or Don have any last thoughts about the beloved community, building that allyship, and Mrs. Stone in the context of Bellevue School District, please have them. The floor is yours.
Donovan?
Well, it's important that we have to understand as much as we're celebrating Black History Month and Black History 365, we could not do it alone. You need allies. You need people from all communities, but most importantly, you need people in those positions of power or authority to say, this is more than just a position. We see people on their merit, on their work, on their potential. And too often that gets lost in the shuffle where society tends to group everybody into one role or one narrative, or Black narrative, white narrative, Asian narrative. And we have to remember that there has to be people in positions or in those power, right? Whether it be in an administration role to say, this is our need. We just need the best educator. All the other nonsense, let's leave that out. And that's important when we're building bridges, when we're talking about history, because there's always two sides. And in order for any level of success, everybody needs some form of help. And if there's a message we take away from this podcast is we're as cliche as it sounds, is we really are stronger together than apart. And for what Dr. Reverend Jesse Jackson, he played a huge part in the role of trying to build bridges and fences. And, it's a loss that the community is going to feel.
And if I could just end on this, I first came across Reverend Jackson in person at an anti-war rally against the Iraq War. Being a pilot, I had an overnight in Washington, D.C., so they were having an anti-war protest. So, of course, I changed my uniform, went down and joined the protest, and there was Jesse Jackson. I remember seeing him there. And I mentioned that to a friend of mine today. Donovan wrote a story about a guy named Larry Jackson. And Larry today told me a story about Jesse Jackson, that Reverend Jackson got Larry his first job at the A&P grocery store. And it was Jesse Jackson who got him the job in Chicago. And so, it is interesting. There aren't many degrees of separation when you come down to it. And look what I would have missed in my life if I didn't want diversity in my life. It just wouldn't have been the same. And what I have to say, if there was, you asked me in writing, if there was one lesson that I'd hope students, families, and educators can carry forward, and that is empathy, kindness, compassion, and that one teacher, one person can profoundly influence others for generations, and that how lucky I am that I was her student and I can participate in trying to, in my small way, give back today what she gave to me.
Don, thank you so much. Donovan, thank you so much. That's a wrap.
And a special thank you to Principal Amy McDonald, who, when learning about this story, shared it so that we can now share it with you. Thank you.